Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time, far from the gleaming towers and bustling avenues, into a brutal, often invisible corner of history. We're going to explore how you survived as a beggar in medieval Paris. Forget the romanticized images of knights and cathedrals. Imagine instead the cold, hard streets, the gnawing hunger, and the constant struggle for a single crumb of sustenance in one of Europe's largest and most unforgiving cities. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a chilling dive into the harsh realities of desperate survival. You might complain about a long line at the grocery store, but trust me, you wouldn't last a day trying to find your next meal on the cobbled streets of 14th century Paris. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself on the grimy, crowded streets of medieval Paris, a city of narrow alleys, towering cathedrals, and overwhelming smells. But you're not a wealthy merchant, nor a pious scholar. You are a beggar, cast adrift in a world with no safety nets, no social welfare, and very little compassion for the destitute. This is the city's cruel embrace, and your very first breath in this new reality is a gasp of cold, foul air, laced with the stench of human waste, rotting refuse, and unwashed bodies. Your clothes are rags, thin and worn, offering little protection against the biting chill of the morning. Your stomach gnaws at you, a constant, dull ache that has been your companion for days, perhaps weeks. You clutch a small, crude wooden bowl, your only tool, your only hope for survival. The endless stream of humanity flows around you, merchants haggling, apprentices scurrying, noblemen on horseback, their silken garments a stark contrast to your own misery. They barely glance at you, their faces set in indifference or, occasionally, disdain. The immediate reality is the overwhelming lack of basic necessities. Food is not a given, it's a desperate quest. You learn to scan the ground for dropped crusts of bread, discarded fruit peels, anything that might stave off the gnawing hunger. You hover near bakeries, hoping for a stray crumb, or near butchers, praying for a discarded scrap of gristle. The competition is fierce. Other beggars, just as desperate as you, are everywhere, their hollow eyes mirroring your own. Every discarded bit of food is a treasure, fought over with silent, desperate ferocity. Water, too, is a constant concern. The River Seine, flowing through the heart of the city, is often polluted with human and animal waste. Public wells might be guarded, or simply too crowded to access. You learn to seek out the drip from a leaky gutter after a rain, or to beg for a sip from a kind-hearted laundress. Dehydration, though less immediate than starvation, is a constant, lingering threat, especially during the sweltering summer months when the city truly becomes a cauldron of misery. Shelter is another terrifying challenge. There are no homeless shelters, no warm beds waiting for you. You must find what little protection you can, a shallow alcove in a church wall, the meager overhang of a merchant's stall, or a dark, damp corner beneath a bridge. Every night is a battle against the elements, against the cold, the rain, and the biting winds that sweep through the narrow streets. You learn to curl into the smallest ball possible, hugging yourself for warmth, trying to conjure a fleeting image of a roaring fire, a warmth you might never know. A unique and particularly chilling detail of medieval urban life was the ever-present threat of disease. With open sewers, poor hygiene, and dense populations, plagues and various illnesses were rampant. As a beggar, living in squalor, constantly exposed to the elements, and weakened by malnutrition, you are incredibly vulnerable. A simple cough could turn into a deadly lung infection. A small cut could fester into a fatal gangrene. You see the signs of sickness everywhere, festering sores, hacking coughs, eyes dulled by fever. Every ache in your body, every slight chill, sends a shiver of terror through you, knowing that a serious illness means almost certain death without anyone to care for you. Historians still debate the average life expectancy for medieval beggars compared to other social classes, but it's clear their existence was exceptionally precarious due to disease. You might even find yourself wishing for the relatively simple pain of a physical beating, where at least the suffering was immediate and finite, unlike the insidious, drawn-out horror of sickness. The sheer anonymity of your existence is another burden. You are one face among thousands, forgotten as soon as you are passed by. No one knows your name, your past, or your suffering. You are a ghost, a shadow flitting through the edges of a society that largely wishes you didn't exist. This erasure of your identity, this reduction to a mere inconvenience, is a subtle form of cruelty, stripping you of your humanity. The competition among beggars is brutal. There are no rules, no charity beyond what is freely given. Older, more established beggars might claim prime spots near church doors or market entrances, fiercely defending their territory. You learn to observe, to find less desirable, but safer, niches, or to move constantly, seeking new opportunities. This struggle for space, for visibility, for a meager share of the scraps, makes every interaction with another beggar a wary dance, a potential conflict. Every day is a grinding cycle of cold, hunger, and the desperate search for survival. You learn to be resourceful, to be invisible when necessary, and to develop an almost supernatural ability to spot a potential source of charity in the indifferent sea of faces. Your survival depends entirely on your wit, your endurance, and the rare flicker of compassion from a passerby. This cruel embrace of the city means that your life is a constant, terrifying gamble. There are no guarantees, no safety nets, and no easy way out. You are utterly alone, facing the relentless indifference of a world that has no place for you. Yet somehow, you must find a way to endure, to survive just one more day in the grim, unforgiving reality of medieval Paris. The pressure is constant, a cold, unyielding weight pressing down on your very soul. You've felt the brutal indifference of the city, the gnawing hunger, and the cold touch of exposure. Now, let's confront the terrifying, relentless cycle that dominates every waking moment of a beggar's life. A penny for your thoughts and life. Imagine every hour, every minute, being consumed by the desperate, primal quest for the barest necessities. A scrap of food, a gulp of water, a sliver of warmth, in a world where generosity is fleeting and survival is a constant, exhausting battle. Your day begins not with the rising sun, but with the painful awareness of your empty stomach. The hunger is a constant companion, a dull, persistent ache that never truly leaves you. You quickly learn that foraging is an art form. You scan the bustling markets, your eyes sharper than any hawk's, searching for dropped vegetables, discarded fruit, or a baker's burnt loaf tossed into the gutter. Every scrap is a potential meal, and competition is fierce. You often find yourself jostling with other beggars, or even stray dogs, for the same meager morsel. It's a constant, low-grade warfare for survival, where every calorie counts. The quality of your scavenged food is, to put it mildly, abysmal. You eat what you can find, regardless of how stale, bruised, or even rotten it might be. Moldy bread, discarded fish heads, the skins of vegetables. These become your sustenance. Your body, already weakened by exposure and lack of proper nutrition, struggles to extract any energy from this meager fare. The taste of hunger is far more potent than the taste of the food itself. You might even find yourself wishing for the simple, guaranteed misery of manual labor. At least then, your stomach would be full. Water is equally precious and often just as difficult to acquire safely. The Seine, as you know, is a sewer. Public wells are often the best source, but they can be guarded or controlled by intimidating figures who demand a price you cannot pay. You learn to recognize the drip of a leaky pipe or the overflow of a trough, silently collecting what you can in your crude bowl. You become acutely aware of the sky, praying for rain, for every drop means a temporary reprieve from thirst. Dehydration is a slow, insidious killer, making your head throb and your movements sluggish. Beyond food and water, the constant quest for shelter is paramount. As night falls, the city transforms into a cold, dangerous labyrinth. Every doorway, every alleyway, every overhang becomes a potential refuge. You seek out places slightly less exposed to the biting wind, or corners that offer a small measure of concealment from curious eyes. The stone walls of buildings, retaining some of the day's heat, become a sought-after comfort. But even these offer little true warmth against the pervasive chill of a medieval night. You learn the rhythm of the city's waste, the moments when market stalls close and discarded produce might be left behind, the times when kitchens empty their slops. This grim knowledge is vital. You are, in essence, a scavenger, living off the unwanted refuse of a society that has little use for you. Your sense of dignity, if it ever existed, is slowly eroded by the necessity of survival. A unique and terrifying detail of this relentless struggle was the constant, debilitating fatigue. Imagine waking up exhausted, spending your entire day in a desperate search for sustenance, and then facing a night of cold, uncomfortable, and often restless sleep. Your body is perpetually in a state of depletion, your mind dulled by hunger and lack of rest. This chronic fatigue makes every movement an effort, every decision a struggle. It wears down your resolve, making you vulnerable to illness and exploitation. Historians still debate the specific long-term health consequences of such a life, but chronic malnutrition and exposure certainly contributed to drastically shortened lifespans. You'd likely be constantly shivering, even on a warm day, your body unable to regulate its own temperature effectively. The search for fuel to burn, even a tiny twig or a piece of discarded cloth, becomes an obsession in winter. A small, fleeting fire in a sheltered spot could mean the difference between life and death by freezing. You learn to spot the smallest piece of combustible material, guarding it fiercely from others. The desperate scramble for warmth is a primal urge, driving you to places and actions you never thought possible. Consider the psychological toll of this unending quest. There is no hope for tomorrow, only the terrifying certainty that you must repeat the same desperate struggle. The future shrinks to the next meal, the next sip of water, the next sheltered spot for the night. This relentless focus on immediate survival leaves little room for anything else. No dreams, no aspirations, just the gnawing anxiety of the present moment. Your thoughts become a relentless internal monologue about hunger, cold, and the ever-present threat of collapse. Even simple bodily functions become a challenge. Finding a private place to relieve yourself in a crowded, unhygienic city is difficult and often humiliating. You are constantly aware of your own stench and the stench of others, a constant reminder of your degraded state. This constant discomfort and indignity contribute to the overwhelming psychological burden of your existence. This cycle of desperate foraging, scrounging, and seeking shelter is your reality, day in and day out. It's a life lived on the absolute edge of human endurance, where every success is temporary and every failure could mean your end. The relentless pursuit of a penny for your thoughts, or, more accurately, a penny for your very life, defines your terrible existence in medieval Paris. a grim testament to the sheer will to survive against impossible odds. You've mastered the grim art of survival, scrounging for scraps and seeking fragile shelter, but even these desperate efforts are constantly overshadowed by an even greater, more insidious dread: the shadow of the law. Imagine living in a city where your very existence as a beggar was considered a crime, where every official, every guard, and even some citizens held the power to inflict brutal punishment, imprisonment, or even worse, banishment on a whim. Medieval Paris, like many European cities, had strict laws against vagrancy and begging. While some begging was tolerated, especially by those deemed deserving poor, the truly infirm, or the visibly disabled, many able-bodied beggars were seen as a nuisance, a threat to public order, or even outright criminals. You are not just struggling against hunger and cold. You are struggling against a system that deems you an undesirable element, a blight on the city's meticulously ordered facade. The constant threat of arrest and imprisonment looms over your head like a perpetual storm cloud. City watchmen, often gruff and unforgiving, patrol the streets. They might sweep through an area, rounding up beggars deemed idle or disruptive. If caught, you would be dragged to a municipal prison, a place even more horrifying than the coldest alley. These prisons were often dark, damp, and overflowing with criminals, disease, and despair. There, you'd face harsh conditions, meager rations, and the very real possibility of prolonged detention with no advocate, no trial, and no release date. Punishments for begging could be swift and brutal, designed to deter others through public humiliation and pain. You might witness a fellow beggar being whipped in the public square, or branded, or have their ears cropped as a mark of their crime. These were not just physical punishments. They were meant to strip you of dignity, to mark you as an outcast, and to serve as a terrifying warning to anyone contemplating a similar life. The psychological impact of witnessing such barbarity, knowing it could easily be your fate, is immense. You might even find yourself wishing for the simple, straightforward pain of hunger, rather than the agonizing uncertainty of what punishment might befall you. A unique and particularly cruel aspect of the law's shadow was the practice of banishment. For many medieval cities, including Paris, the preferred solution for dealing with undesirable beggars was simply to expel them from the city limits. Imagine being rounded up, perhaps after weeks or months of desperate survival, and then forcibly marched out of the city gates, often at spear point, and told never to return. You are cast out onto unfamiliar roads with no knowledge of the surrounding countryside, no contacts, and no resources. This wasn't a punishment. It was often a death sentence, forcing you into a nomadic existence fraught with even greater perils, far from any potential source of charity. Historians still debate the effectiveness of banishment as a long-term solution to poverty in medieval cities, but its immediate impact on the exiled beggars was undeniably devastating. You learned to recognize the uniforms of the city watch, the particular stride of a guard on patrol, the subtle shifts in the crowd that indicate an approaching official. You develop a sixth sense for danger, constantly scanning your surroundings, ready to melt into the shadows, to disappear into a labyrinth of narrow alleys and hidden courtyards at a moment's notice. Your life is a perpetual game of cat and mouse, with the city's authorities as the relentless hunters. Even the clergy, who might offer some charity, could also be a source of judgment and control. While some monastic orders or charitable institutions provided meager alms, they often did so with the expectation of conformity or adherence to certain moral codes. You might be forced to attend sermons, or to work in exchange for food, or simply to present yourself in a way that garnered sympathy rather than suspicion. There was little true, unconditional compassion from official sources. The powerful guilds and merchants also exerted control. They saw beggars as a drain on resources, a stain on the city's image, and a potential source of petty crime. They might petition the authorities for stricter enforcement, pushing for harsher penalties and more frequent purges of the destitute. Their economic power translated directly into political pressure, tightening the screws on your already precarious existence. Consider the sheer helplessness of your situation. You have no rights, no voice, and no recourse. If you are wrongly accused or simply caught in a random sweep, there is no one to defend you. You are at the absolute mercy of the law's brutal whims, a tiny, powerless individual against the overwhelming might of the state. This powerlessness is a constant psychological burden, adding to the layers of fear and despair that define your life. This ever-present shadow means that even when you find a scrap of food or a moment of temporary warmth, the relief is fleeting. The threat of capture, punishment, or banishment is a constant, gnawing anxiety, preventing any true sense of peace or security. Your freedom, however limited, is always conditional, always precarious, always dependent on staying one step ahead of the relentless, unforgiving hand of medieval justice. Ultimately, surviving as a beggar in medieval Paris meant constantly navigating the shadow of the law. Your existence was illegal, your presence unwanted, and your fate often decided by the cold, hard dictates of a society that had little patience for the poor. Every day was a perilous dance between the desperate need for sustenance and the terrifying threat of official retribution, making your life a grim testament to the harsh realities of justice in a world with no compassion for the vulnerable. You've learned to fear the law's shadow and to live with gnawing hunger. But surviving in medieval Paris wasn't just about avoiding trouble, it was about mastering the art of the alms. Imagine having to skillfully navigate the indifference, suspicion, and occasional compassion of strangers, learning the desperate strategies and subtle cues that might coax a meager coin or a scrap of food from a wary populace. Your very existence depended on becoming a master of silent persuasion. Your chosen spot for the day might be near the imposing Notre Dame Cathedral, where the faithful gathered for Mass, their hearts perhaps softened by piety, or perhaps a bustling market square, where the abundance of goods might lead to a discarded crust. You learn to observe, to identify potential givers, the richly dressed noble who might seek to impress with his generosity, the pious pilgrim on his way to a holy site, or the compassionate older woman whose eyes hold a flicker of understanding. These are your targets, and every glance, every gesture is carefully calculated. The first rule of begging is visibility without aggression. You cannot demand. You can only implore. You position yourself in a way that is hard to ignore, but not an obstruction. You might sit slumped against a cold stone wall, head bowed, making yourself appear small and non-threatening. Your rags, once a source of shame, become a tool, a stark visual testament to your destitution. The visible signs of your suffering, a persistent cough, a limp, a vacant stare, are your silent appeals. A unique and often surprising aspect of the art of alms was the specialization of begging roles. Not all beggars were the same. Some were professional beggars, sometimes organized into crude networks, who might specialize in feigning illnesses or displaying grotesque deformities to elicit greater sympathy or revulsion, which also worked. Others, like you, might be genuine, but still learn to emphasize your particular plight. A war veteran, a widow, an orphan. This specialization, however grim, was a survival strategy, allowing beggars to tap into different veins of compassion or fear. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval beggars truly organized themselves into guilds or fraternities, but informal networks and shared knowledge were certainly common. You might even find yourself preferring the brutal simplicity of fighting for a piece of bread. where at least your suffering was real, not feigned. You quickly learn the power of silence. A direct, aggressive plea might be met with scorn or a harsh word. Instead, you hold out your bowl, your eyes meeting theirs for a fleeting moment, conveying a world of unspoken suffering. Your gaze is not accusatory, but one of desperate, pleading vulnerability. It's a silent conversation, a desperate prayer carried on the wind, hoping to stir a flicker of empathy in a passerby's heart. The rejection is constant, a relentless assault on your spirit. Hundreds of people might walk past, their faces averted, their hurried steps a clear sign of their indifference. You learn to brace yourself for this, to let the disappointment wash over you quickly, for despair is a luxury you cannot afford. Every averted gaze, every dismissive wave of a hand, chips away at your dignity, but your need for survival pushes you forward. But then, there are the moments of grace. A small coin, a denier, or a mile clinks into your bowl. It's a sound that brings a surge of relief, a brief respite from the gnawing hunger. Or perhaps a piece of food, a crust of bread, a scrap of cheese, a piece of fruit, dropped gently into your hand. These acts of charity, however small, are monumental. They are the difference between another night of agonizing hunger and a momentary feeling of warmth in your empty stomach. You learn to offer a swift, heartfelt blessing, a silent thank you that hopes to encourage further generosity. Consider the psychological toll of this constant exposure to human indifference. You see the opulence of the wealthy, their fine clothes, their abundant food, their comfortable lives, all while you shiver in rags, starving. This stark contrast, this gaping chasm between your reality and theirs, can breed bitterness and resentment. Yet, you must suppress these feelings, for anger will not fill your bowl. You must maintain a facade of passive suffering, a quiet humility that appeals to the charitable impulses of the privileged. You also learn to recognize the subtle rhythms of the city and its generosity. Certain days might be better for begging, feast days, religious holidays, or market days when more people are out and about. Certain locations might be more fruitful, church entrances, bridges, or busy intersections. This accumulated knowledge, shared amongst the more experienced beggars, becomes your survival guide, a grim strategy manual for extracting sustenance from a harsh world. The brief interactions you have with those who offer charity are fleeting but meaningful. They are moments of human connection in a dehumanizing existence. Their faces, their words of pity, or even their simple act of giving, are rare acknowledgments of your humanity. These glimmers of compassion, however rare, are what sustain you, what prevent you from succumbing entirely to despair. Ultimately, surviving as a beggar in medieval Paris meant mastering the art of the alms. It was a brutal education in human nature, a daily test of endurance, humility, and the desperate art of silent persuasion. Your life depended on your ability to elicit charity from a wary populace, to navigate a world of indifference with a fragile hope, and to accept every small act of kindness as a lifeline in the terrifying, unforgiving embrace of the city. You've learned the silent language of begging, the desperate plea for a meager coin, but as dusk settles over Paris, a new terror descends night's cold embrace. Imagine the harrowing, hour-by-hour search for a safe sleeping spot, the constant battle against the brutal cold, the creeping shadows, and the unseen perils that emerge once the city's respectable inhabitants retreat behind their locked doors. As the last rays of sun fade, the narrow streets, once bustling with life, begin to empty. Shopkeepers pull down their shutters, the calls of merchants die away, and the great doors of the cathedral groan shut. For you, the beggar, this isn't a time for rest. It's a desperate race against the clock, The best, most sheltered spots are claimed quickly by other, often stronger, beggars. You must find what little protection you can, and quickly. Your search takes you into the deepest, darkest corners of the city. A shallow alcove in the wall of a nobleman's palace might offer a brief respite from the wind, though the stone is unforgivingly cold. A stable's entrance, smelling faintly of horses and straw, might provide a sliver of warmth from the animals inside, but it's often guarded or already occupied. You might try to squeeze into a space beneath a market stall, hoping the wooden planks offer some barrier against the biting night air. Every possible nook, every hidden cranny, is scouted with desperate hope. The cold is a relentless, insidious enemy. Even in spring or autumn, the medieval night could be bone-chilling. In winter, it was a killer. Your thin, tattered clothes offer almost no insulation. You learn to curl into a tight ball, tucking your head between your knees, trying to preserve any residual body heat. You might try to find discarded straw or rags to pile around yourself, a desperate attempt at insulation. Sleep, when it comes, is fitful and shallow, broken by shivers, the nagging ache of cold, and the constant fear of what the darkness might hold. A unique and terrifying aspect of sleeping on the streets was the threat of violence from other desperate individuals or predatory criminals. The night belonged to thieves, cutthroats, and those driven to desperation. A beggar carrying a few coins, or even just a usable blanket, could become a target. You learn to choose your sleeping spot, not just for warmth, but for concealment and a slim chance of escape. You sleep with one eye open, your crude wooden bowl clutched tightly to your chest, knowing that even the meager possessions you have could be violently taken. Historians still debate the precise rates of crime against beggars in medieval cities, but anecdotal evidence suggests they were highly vulnerable to assault and robbery. You might even wish for the straightforward danger of dodging a nobleman's carriage, where at least the threat was visible. Beyond human predators, there was the constant presence of vermin. Rats, bold and numerous in medieval cities, would scurry in the darkness, seeking out any scraps of food. They could bite, transmitting diseases, or simply add to the pervasive sense of disgust and discomfort. Fleas and lice were constant companions, their incessant itching making restful sleep impossible. You are forced to share your meager, temporary shelter with creatures of the night, adding to the degradation of your existence. The silence of the late night is not truly silent. It's filled with the unsettling sounds of a city asleep, but not still the distant howl of dogs, the eerie creak of ancient buildings, the drip of water in unseen gutters, and the unsettling scuttling of unseen creatures. Every shadow seems to hold a threat. Every unexpected sound sends a jolt of fear through your exhausted body. Your senses are on high alert, even when your body screams for rest, preventing any true peace. The search for warmth often led to dangerous places. Sometimes, you might try to huddle near the communal fires that glowed in front of taverns or public bathhouses, lingering as long as you dared before being chased away. Or you might risk sleeping close to the walls of a bakery or forge, hoping to catch a stray bit of residual heat from the day's fires, knowing the risk of being discovered and beaten for trespassing. Every attempt at comfort came with a hidden cost, a potential peril. Consider the profound psychological impact of this constant nightly struggle. The day is for seeking, the night is for surviving. You learn to dread the setting sun, knowing it brings not rest, but renewed peril. The exhaustion is cumulative, wearing down your spirit, making it harder to find hope or comfort. The cold seeps not just into your bones, but into your very soul, a constant reminder of your desperate, precarious existence. You might wake abruptly from a brief, shallow sleep, shivering violently, your teeth chattering, or perhaps a sudden noise, a distant shout, jolts you awake, sending a wave of panic through your body. There's no true sense of security, no feeling of being truly safe or warm. Every night is a gamble, a test of endurance against the elements and the unseen dangers of the urban underworld. Ultimately, surviving as a beggar in medieval Paris meant enduring night's cold embrace, night after night. It was a harrowing, solitary struggle against the relentless chill, the threat of violence, and the creeping despair of homelessness. Every dawn was a small victory, a testament to your resilience, a brief reprieve from the terrors of the dark, allowing you to rise once more and face the relentless struggle for another day. You've survived the brutal nights, the cold and the fear, but even when you found a brief moment of warmth, another, more insidious enemy always lurked, disease's invisible grip. Imagine living in a city where every breath could bring sickness, every cut could fester, and every cough could be the precursor to a swift, horrifying end. As a beggar in medieval Paris, you weren't just fighting hunger and the law, you were constantly battling an unseen legion of pathogens, making your very body a battlefield. Medieval Paris was a labyrinth of narrow, unpaved streets, often choked with refuse. Open sewers ran down the middle of many alleys, carrying human and animal waste. Garbage piled up in courtyards, attracting swarms of rats and flies. Hygiene was rudimentary, even for the wealthy, and virtually non-existent for the poor. The air itself was thick with the stench of decay, body odor, and various effluvia, a constant vector for illness. For you, living exposed on these streets, these conditions were not just unpleasant, they were a death sentence waiting to happen. The most terrifying threat was, of course, plague. While not always the infamous Black Death, outbreaks of bubonic or pneumonic plague were recurrent horrors that swept through cities with terrifying speed. Imagine waking with a sudden fever, a splitting headache, or the ominous swelling of lymph nodes, buboes in your groin or armpit. You know what these signs mean. Panic, cold and sharp, clutches your heart. There is no doctor for you, no medicine, no escape. You are utterly alone, facing a disease that could kill a king, let alone a starving beggar. Beyond the great plagues, a constant parade of lesser, yet still deadly, illnesses tormented the populace. Dysentery, caused by contaminated water or food, led to severe dehydration and often death, especially for those already weakened by hunger. Tuberculosis, a persistent cough that slowly consumed its victims, was rampant in overcrowded, damp conditions. Fevers, smallpox, measles, and a host of other ailments were common, each a potential killer for a body with a compromised immune system. A unique and particularly cruel aspect of these diseases for beggars was the stigma associated with visible illness. If you developed sores, a persistent cough, or other obvious symptoms of disease, people would actively avoid you, fearing contagion. This meant your primary source of survival, alms from passers-by, would dry up. You might be shunned from even the most crowded areas, forced into deeper isolation just when you needed help the most. The very signs of your suffering, intended to elicit pity, instead became marks of untouchability, pushing you closer to a silent, lonely death. Historians still debate the specific social reactions to disease in medieval Paris and how it impacted begging practices, but fear of contagion was certainly a significant factor. You might even find yourself wishing for the physical simplicity of a broken bone, where at least the cause was clear and the outcome, however grim, was singular. Even minor injuries could turn fatal. A simple cut from a piece of broken glass in the street, a scratch from a scuttling rat, or a sore from constant chafing could quickly become infected. Without antiseptics or antibiotics, a bacterial infection could rage unchecked, leading to gangrene, blood poisoning, and a slow, agonizing death. Your body, already struggling with malnutrition, lacked the strength to fight off even the most common pathogens. Every small wound was a potential gateway for an invisible killer. The constant exposure to the elements made you particularly vulnerable. Rain would soak your thin clothes, leading to hypothermia and pneumonia. The relentless sun could cause heat stroke. The perpetual dampness of your sleeping spots fostered fungal infections and skin conditions. Your body was in a constant state of assault, and its natural defenses were worn thin. Consider the psychological burden of this invisible enemy. You can't see disease, but you know it's everywhere. Every sneeze from a passerby, every unexplained ache in your limbs, every new rash sends a jolt of terror through your mind. You live in a state of perpetual anxiety, knowing that at any moment an unseen force could strike you down, bringing an end far more agonizing than hunger or cold. This constant dread is a silent, insidious torment, eroding your spirit day by day. There was no access to medical care. For the wealthy, there were physicians and apothecaries, however rudimentary their methods. For you, there was nothing. No healing potions, no comforting words, no clean bandages. You simply suffered, alone, hoping your body could fight off the sickness or succumbing to it in a forgotten alley. Your survival was a testament to sheer luck and a brutal resilience, not any form of intervention. Ultimately, surviving as a beggar in medieval Paris meant a constant, terrifying battle against disease's invisible grip. Your body was a fragile fortress besieged by unseen enemies, and your environment was a breeding ground for their relentless assault. The threat of infection, plague, and countless other ailments was omnipresent, making every breath a gamble and every day a desperate fight for survival against a foe you could neither see nor comprehend, leaving you utterly alone in your suffering. You've battled the invisible grip of disease and the overwhelming stench of medieval squalor. But in a world where formal institutions offered no help, survival often depended on finding community in desperation. The brotherhood of the streets. Imagine navigating a complex, often dangerous, social hierarchy among fellow beggars, where alliances could mean a shared crust of bread or a safe sleeping spot. But betrayals could lead to brutal consequences. You are not truly alone on the streets of Paris. Thousands of others just like you claw at the edges of existence. This creates a strange, informal society, a hidden world with its own unwritten rules, territories, and hierarchies. Some beggars might be solitary figures, driven by extreme independence or trauma. Others gravitate towards groups, finding a fragile strength in numbers. You learn quickly that understanding this intricate social landscape is as vital as finding food. At the lowest rung are the newcomers, often bewildered and naive, easy prey for more seasoned beggars. You might have been one of them, learning through harsh experience. Then there are the true beggars, genuinely infirm, crippled, or blind, often eliciting more sympathy and therefore more alms. They might hold prime spots near church doors, respected for their visible suffering. Above them are the more organized groups, often controlled by charismatic, sometimes ruthless, leaders. These leaders might control specific territories, collecting a tax from beggars operating within their domain in exchange for a semblance of protection or access to better begging spots. They might even organize petty theft or swindling, turning begging into a more structured, criminal enterprise. Aligning with such a group could offer stability and safety from individual predators, but it also meant submission to their authority and sharing your meager earnings. A unique and terrifying detail of this brotherhood was the deliberate self-mutilation or feigning of grotesque diseases by some beggars to elicit greater pity and more alms. These were often known as fakers or Abraham men, though more common in later periods. The concept existed. Imagine encountering someone who has deliberately disfigured a limb or rubbed lye into their skin to create sores or feigned madness. This gruesome practice highlights the extreme lengths to which people were driven by desperation, and it made it even harder for truly suffering beggars to gain genuine sympathy. Historians still debate the prevalence and specific methods of self-mutilation for begging in medieval Paris, but accounts from the period describe such practices as part of the street landscape. You might even find yourself preferring the honest gnawing of hunger to the horrifying sight of a self-inflicted wound. Betrayal within this brotherhood was a constant threat. Information, however mundane, could be currency. Someone might inform the city watch about your sleeping spot in exchange for a few coins or a favored position. A shared crust of bread one day could be followed by a brutal ambush the next, as trust was a luxury few could truly afford. You learn to be wary, to read subtle cues, and to discern friend from foe in a world where everyone is struggling to survive. The communication within this network was often subtle. Hand signals, coded phrases, or specific routes might be used to warn of approaching guards, to indicate a fruitful begging spot, or to signal danger. You absorb these unwritten codes through observation and painful experience, becoming fluent in the silent language of the streets. This knowledge is crucial for navigating the hidden dangers and opportunities that arise. Sometimes, acts of genuine solidarity would occur. A shared fire on a freezing night, a warning about a dangerous alley, a whispered tip about a discarded meal. These moments, rare as they might be, were lifelines, reminding you that even in the depths of despair, a flicker of human connection could exist. They were often fleeting, born of mutual desperation, but vital for survival. The threat of being ostracized from a group, or from the informal beggar community altogether, was also significant. If you were deemed untrustworthy, too weak, or simply unwelcome, you could find yourself completely isolated, making your survival even more precarious. The psychological impact of total solitude in such a harsh environment could be crushing, leading to a quicker demise. Consider the profound moral compromises forced upon you. To survive, you might have to tolerate petty crime, witness exploitation, or even participate in deceptive practices. The lines between right and wrong blur when your very existence is a daily fight. Your own humanity is challenged as you do what is necessary, shedding ideals that simply cannot survive in the brutal reality of the streets. Ultimately, surviving as a beggar in medieval Paris meant becoming intimately familiar with the brotherhood of the streets. It was a grim, complex society of desperation, where trust was fragile, alliances were temporary, and survival often depended on navigating a treacherous network of fellow sufferers. The lessons learned in this brutal school of hard knocks were about cunning, caution, and the desperate, often morally ambiguous art of finding a place, however small, within the city's unforgiving embrace. You've learned to navigate the dangers of the street brotherhood and the silent threat of disease, but as the seasons turn, a new, primal terror descends upon medieval Paris, one that tests your very will to live winter's icy scythe. Imagine the relentless, bone-chilling cold, the biting winds, and the desperate, often futile, struggle against freezing to death or succumbing to the slow, agonizing process of starvation that the harsh winter months brought to a beggar's life. As autumn's chill deepens, a palpable dread settles over the streets. The days shorten, the light dims, and the air bites with a new ferocity. Your thin rags, barely sufficient in summer, offer no real defense against the encroaching cold. Every breath turns to mist, and your fingers and toes ache with a constant deep numbness that threatens to turn into something far more sinister. This isn't just discomfort. It's a direct, visceral threat to your existence. The search for shelter becomes even more frantic and competitive. Every doorway, every narrow alley, every space beneath a bridge is fiercely contested. You might find yourself huddled with other beggars, pressed together for a meager shared warmth, a silent camaraderie born of mutual desperation. But even in a group, the cold seeps into your bones, a constant insidious enemy that exhausts your meager energy reserves. You're always shivering, your teeth chattering, your body screaming for warmth it cannot find. Food, already scarce, becomes almost impossible to find. The markets offer less discarded produce as harvests dwindle. Frozen ground yields no roots or forgotten scraps. The wealthier households, preparing for winter, are less likely to throw out edible refuse. The gnawing hunger intensifies, turning into a constant, painful emptiness that drains your strength and dulls your senses. You feel your body slowly consuming itself, a terrifying internal process that you can do nothing to stop. A unique and terrifying aspect of winter was the risk of frostbite and gangrene. Your exposed skin, fingers, toes, nose, ears, was constantly at risk of freezing. Imagine the slow loss of sensation, followed by an agonizing throb, and then the chilling reality as patches of your skin turn black. Without proper medical care, frostbite often led to gangrene, where the affected tissue died and rotted, requiring amputation or, more likely for a beggar, leading to a slow, agonizing death from infection. Historians still debate the specific prevalence of frostbite-related deaths and amputations among the medieval poor, but the extreme cold certainly made it a significant and common danger. You might find yourself wishing for the relatively simple pain of a public whipping, where at least the damage was immediate and visible, unlike the insidious, creeping horror of frozen flesh. The lack of proper sleep also became a killer. You might drift off for short periods, but the cold would invariably wake you, forcing you to move, to stamp your feet, to rub your arms, in a desperate attempt to stay alive. The cumulative exhaustion meant your body's ability to fight off illness was almost non-existent. A simple cold could quickly escalate into fatal pneumonia, accelerated by constant exposure to the bitter air. Even the air itself could be deadly. The biting winds would strip away any warmth, accelerating hypothermia, falling snow. While beautiful for those inside, was a death shroud for those without shelter, turning into a chilling, soaking layer that clung to your rags. The ground became frozen and unforgiving, turning every step into an icy struggle. The sheer loneliness of winter, despite being surrounded by others, was profound. Everyone was fighting their own desperate battle for warmth and survival. Compassion, already scarce, became even rarer as people hoarded what little they had. You might see a fellow beggar succumb to the cold, their bodies stiff and still in the morning light, a chilling reminder of your own precarious existence. This constant awareness of death, so close and so relentless, weighs heavily on your spirit. Consider the psychological impact of this relentless cold. It invades your thoughts, numbing your mind, making it difficult to focus on anything but your immediate discomfort. Hope, already a flickering flame, threatens to extinguish entirely. Despair becomes a heavy cloak, wrapping itself around you, whispering promises of eternal warmth if you just give up. It's a profound test of your mental resilience, a battle against your own will to continue. The limited availability of public fires, often around guild halls or official buildings, became desperate focal points. You'd compete fiercely for a spot near their meager warmth, enduring shoves and glares from others, just for a few moments of heat on your numbed hands. These fleeting moments of warmth were treasures, but they also highlighted the utter misery of the rest of your existence. Ultimately, surviving as a beggar in medieval Paris during winter meant confronting winter's icy scythe. It was a relentless, agonizing struggle against the cold. starvation, and disease, where every single day was a battle for your life. The relentless chill seeped into your very soul, turning the city into a vast, frozen tomb, and making your very survival a testament to an almost superhuman and terrifyingly lonely will to endure. You've battled the icy grip of winter, the constant gnawing of hunger, and the invisible threat of disease. But even for the most resilient beggar, there's a point where the crushing reality of street life becomes too much. This chapter explores the desperate, often futile attempts to break free beyond the city walls. Imagine the terrifying decision to leave the only world you know, driven by a flicker of hope or the sheer impossibility of continuing, only to face unknown perils on unfamiliar roads. The motivation to leave Paris could stem from many sources. Perhaps a brutal winter has decimated your meager network of fellow beggars, leaving you utterly alone. Perhaps the city watch has intensified its sweeps, making your accustomed begging spots too dangerous. Or maybe, just maybe, a rumor has reached your ears of better prospects in another town, a lord known for his charity, or a distant relative who might offer a meager crumb of assistance. This isn't a planned journey, it's a desperate flight, a last gamble against total despair. Leaving the city itself is a terrifying ordeal. The gates of Paris, massive and imposing, are usually guarded. You might try to slip out at dawn, mingling with merchants and farmers entering or leaving, hoping to blend into the stream of humanity. Or you might attempt a more clandestine exit under the cover of darkness, risking detection by guards or the dangers of the unlit surrounding areas. The fear of being caught and punished for unauthorized travel, or simply being turned back, is immense. Once outside the familiar, albeit brutal, confines of Paris, you face a new set of horrors: the unpredictable, often hostile, countryside. The roads are not paved. They are dirt tracks, muddy in rain, dusty in drought. There are no clear directions, no signposts. You rely on instinct, the distant sight of a spire, or the vague directions offered by wary peasants who often view strangers with deep suspicion. The vast, open spaces, once a forgotten freedom, are now intimidating and alien. A unique and terrifying detail of this journey was the constant threat of rural bandits and predatory vagabonds. While the city had its dangers, the countryside was often less policed and more isolated, making it a prime hunting ground for desperate outlaws. A lone beggar, thin and vulnerable, carrying nothing but a few rags, would be an easy target. You could be robbed of your meager bowl, beaten, or even killed, with no one to bear witness. The very emptiness of the landscape, once a symbol of peace, now becomes a source of profound dread. Historians still debate the specific prevalence and organization of banditry in medieval France, but traveler accounts consistently highlight it as a significant danger outside of major urban centers. You might even find yourself wishing for the relative safety of a Parisian alley, where at least the threats were somewhat familiar. Food and water become even more scarce. There are no bustling markets to scavenge from, no city kitchens to discard scraps. You must rely on foraging in forests, trying to identify edible berries or roots, a dangerous gamble if you're not learned in herbs, or begging at isolated farmhouses, where hospitality is often scarce and suspicion high. Peasants, themselves living close to subsistence, have little to spare, and are wary of strangers who might be thieves or bring disease. Shelter is almost non-existent. You sleep in ditches, under hedges, or in abandoned barns if you're lucky. The cold is even more intense away from the insulating warmth of city buildings. You are utterly exposed to the elements, to the wind, the rain, and the biting cold of the open land. Every night is a battle for warmth, a desperate attempt to avoid hypothermia. The sense of isolation is profound. There are no other beggars for camaraderie, no familiar faces. You are truly alone, adrift in a vast, indifferent landscape. The psychological burden of this solitude, combined with constant fear and physical hardship, can be crushing. Despair, a silent predator, stalks your every step, whispering temptations to simply give up. Sometimes, your journey might take you to a small village or another town, but often, the reception is just as harsh, or even harsher, than in Paris. Local authorities, wary of outsiders and vagrants, might immediately drive you away, or imprison you. The hope of finding a better life often turns out to be a cruel mirage, leading only to further suffering and disillusionment. You are constantly searching for a mythical sanctuary that never quite materializes. Even if you found a benevolent lord or a monastery willing to offer temporary charity, it was often short-lived. They might provide food and shelter for a night or two, but then you'd be sent on your way, back to the harsh roads, your hopes dashed once more. These brief reprieves, though welcome, only highlighted the relentless, unending nature of your struggle. Ultimately, trying to survive as a beggar by venturing beyond the city walls was a desperate gamble, often a futile one. It was a terrifying exchange of known miseries for unknown, potentially greater, perils. The countryside offered no salvation, only a different kind of brutal indifference, pushing you further to the brink. This journey of desperate hope and crushing reality encapsulates the utter hopelessness of a life defined by poverty in medieval Europe, where escape was often just another path to suffering, and true sanctuary remained an elusive dream. You've traversed the grim landscape of a medieval beggar's existence, from the city's cruel embrace to the desperate gamble beyond its walls. Now, as our harrowing journey concludes, let's reflect on a forgotten echo. Imagine how the brutal realities of the medieval beggar, though largely unrecorded in grand histories, leave an enduring, harsh legacy, shaping not only the lives of the destitute but also influencing societal attitudes and welfare systems for centuries to come. The most immediate legacy of the medieval beggar was their invisibility in historical records. Unlike kings, knights, or even wealthy merchants, the poor rarely left written accounts of their lives. Their stories are largely absent from official documents, chronicles, and personal letters. This silence is perhaps the most profound horror of all, a life of immense suffering, endured by countless individuals, yet largely unacknowledged by history itself. Their voices are lost, their struggles forgotten, leaving only faint echoes in the margins of society. This lack of detailed historical record means that our understanding of their daily lives is often pieced together from indirect sources, legal codes attempting to control them, charitable records providing meager aid, or the dismissive comments of chroniclers. It's a grim puzzle, where every fragment hints at a vast, untold story of human endurance and despair. The true scope of their suffering is almost unimaginable, precisely because it was so often ignored. The shaping of social attitudes. The medieval beggar also left a significant, albeit harsh, legacy on societal attitudes towards poverty. For centuries, poverty was often viewed through a moral or religious lens. While Christian charity encouraged almsgiving, it also often distinguished between the deserving poor, the genuinely infirm, widows, orphans, and the undeserving poor, able-bodied vagrants seen as lazy or criminal. This distinction, deeply ingrained in medieval thought, shaped how charity was dispensed and how the destitute were treated, leading to inconsistent and often brutal responses. The fear of the undeserving poor contributed to the development of harsh vagrancy laws, public punishments, and forced banishments that continued for centuries. This mindset that poverty was a personal failing or a moral blight rather than a systemic issue persisted long after the Middle Ages. You can see its echoes in later workhouses, poor laws, and societal judgments that often blamed the impoverished for their own plight, rather than addressing the root causes of their desperation. Seeds of future welfare. Despite the overwhelming indifference and cruelty, the medieval beggar's existence, paradoxically, also planted the seeds for future welfare systems. The Church's emphasis on charity, however limited or conditional, led to the establishment of monastic almshouses, hospitals which often cared for the poor, and guild charities. These institutions, however small, represented early, rudimentary attempts at providing some form of social safety net, born from a religious imperative to care for the vulnerable. The sheer scale of poverty in medieval cities also forced municipal authorities to occasionally intervene, even if primarily to maintain public order. This sometimes led to limited forms of organized relief, such as the distribution of bread or the establishment of rudimentary shelters during harsh winters. These were not comprehensive welfare states, but rather pragmatic responses to prevent outright chaos and disease, recognizing that unchecked destitution could threaten the entire social fabric. Historians still debate the extent to which these medieval charitable and civic interventions genuinely alleviated suffering versus simply managing the visible symptoms of poverty, but they represent an early, hesitant step towards institutionalized support, a lingering presence. Even as the medieval period faded, the image and reality of the beggar persisted, evolving but never fully disappearing. They remained a constant, uncomfortable presence in society, a stark reminder of economic inequality and human vulnerability. Their strategies for survival, the silent plea, the feigned illness, the desperate search for scraps, continued to be employed, adapting to changing urban landscapes and societal norms. Consider the enduring psychological echo, the fear of ending up on the streets, the knowledge of how easily one could fall from grace into utter destitution, was a pervasive anxiety for many in medieval society, not just the poor. The beggar was a living cautionary tale, a grim mirror reflecting the fragility of life and fortune. This fear, however uncomfortable, perhaps subtly motivated people to work harder, to maintain their social standing, and to avoid the terrible fate of the street. Ultimately, the terrible life of a beggar in medieval Paris, though a harsh and often anonymous existence, left a profound and lasting legacy. It highlighted the brutal indifference of a society without safety nets, yet also sparked the first tentative efforts at organized charity. Their suffering became a forgotten echo in the grand narrative of history, but one that continues to remind us of the enduring human struggle against poverty, the slow evolution of social conscience, and the long, arduous path towards a more compassionate world. Their silent screams and desperate pleas paved the way for future understandings of human dignity, even if they themselves never knew it. Now that the tales of cruel fates have died down, let your mind wander through the dark alleys and bustling markets. Feel the peace of the night slowly envelop you, bringing with it the silence of the long journey. Let the images of the bone-chilling cold and the constant fear fade gently from your mind. There is no more pressure or the fierce struggle for survival. There is only the calm of the darkness and the invitation of deep sleep. Let all the tension go away and allow your body to rest. The worries of the day are gone, giving way to peace. You have listened to a story of resilience and survival in another era. Now it is time to let those lessons gently slip into your dreams, blending with the gentle sounds of the night. Let yourself drift away into a deep sleep where beautiful dreams await. Good night.